Hi. So I wanted to talk about my general reflections on life and death and the soul, all intimately bound up with each other, I feel. And I think it's a fascinating subject to explore. It's something that actually is connected to all subjects, of course. And I think we have a tendency to assume what death is personally and what life is, therefore, as well. Um, if you look at the two, you can't really have one without the other. Um, even in life, there is death, of course, as the phrase says. All things that grow also wither and decay. It's a natural phenomenon that we observe, of course. You know, all us humans are mortal in a sense, or at least our bodies are. And that's something that we observe. We as humans have that foresight and knowledge that, at least biologically speaking, perhaps even neurologically, our body decays, and that it's something that is a natural phenomenon. We observe that, of course, in others, our own loved ones, perhaps, and in all people. It's something that we've all known about and we all grow up with. When we're very young, perhaps we don't know as much about it. And we're probably much more curious to ask questions when we're young. But I think as we get older, we maybe have a tendency to then form opinions or beliefs about things, as we would do because we're more developed neurologically. Our brains are developing then. We've got greater ability to do things. We develop the ability to write and to think more critically, to move in different ways, to use our body and our mind increasingly in a variety of different ways. Our ability to form complex sentences in grammar, and our amount of words that we're able to use increases as we go through older ages. And so naturally, we're able to sort of come into contact with more different concepts. And so our ability to have different beliefs grows. However, we all have a tendency and a risk sometimes to adopt various beliefs without always questioning them. And it's something we all do. You know, we can well believe something that turns out to be wrong, without having, researched the foundations of it, without having properly examined and questioned it thoroughly enough. On the other hand, it could be that we have invested sufficient time and energy into something, and that we are able to sort of say something is real and a phenomenon that is evidenced, and our belief is justified in something. I, for many years, on a personal level, had a belief for many years that death of the body necessarily meant the end of ourselves. But that was based on an assumption that I think is widespread still, that we ourselves are just a material biological body, and that's all we are. But I actually, over many years, have revised my thoughts on that, and have come to feel much more that we are something else rather than just a material body. My life experience over many years has taught me that we have an essence, whatever we define it as. And I don't think we can fully define what it is, but our essence, whether we call it a soul or spirit, it's something that isn't just physical, that can't be perceived and analyzed in the same way that a physical, natural phenomenon can be. Something like a soul is, as a concept, is common to all cultures. It's something you will find, although the type of description of it, and how it's understood can vary hugely, of course. But I think you'll find, from an anthropological point of view, that it's widespread. I haven't yet found a society that didn't at least have some concept within it, philosophically, theologically, of a soul. That's not to prove that there is such a real thing as that, because it could easily be that we have widespread delusions, and that through wishful thinking, we want to believe in something beyond merely the physical reality. But it certainly should cause us to consider and to want to investigate something, given the fact that it has got such a widespread currency throughout many cultures and languages and different philosophies and theologies that maybe have very different understandings, but at least seem to suggest that there is a widespread belief in something like a soul. So it's worth taking the time to sort of look into that personally, ourselves. And I think it has got to be a personal journey at looking at it, from our own point of view, but also engaging with others and discussing it with them and finding out what other people's reflections and experiences are too. But of course, we have to be somewhat wary, because we can make mistakes, of course, or sometimes we can not want to look at the truth of a situation. We can be distorted in our view. We don't want to see the best and the worst of our own character, for example, perhaps. It's very interesting. There's been lots of attempts to sort of study the soul, but oftentimes that is through a scientific means, and that's through a materialistic viewpoint often. And I think many of those studies have failed. They failed to prove objectively an existence in terms of using scientific methods. Now, that in itself doesn't prove that there is or that there isn't a soul, because it could be that we're using the wrong methods to try and study a phenomenon that may be outside of the realms of science, perhaps. And it may be looking at other types of science as well. For example, psychology. It may be worthwhile studying different people's behaviors, and so there are a variety of ways, in which we might study, what a soul might be. But how can we study whether there is a soul or not if we don't know what it is to begin with, what we're looking for? That's a curious thing. And I liken it to the study of God in some ways, just for the reason that we don't know what we're looking for to begin with to accept or reject it. So we must be cautious, I feel, before we are too quick to rush to any judgment. A fair trial in life, and in a judicial context, has to be one in which we allow the evidence fair time to be looked through. And we don't rush it, but we look at the arguments both for and against, and we weigh them up and we consider them. We try to do that objectively, removing our own biases, what we would like the outcome to be. We may want there to be a soul, we may not want there to be one, but we can't let our own personal desires or wishes be the determining factor, in what that evidence is. But of course, what is the evidence? What is it that we're considering as well? Well, I would say, from my own point of view, that it's our own life experiences. That's a very general statement, but that of course means everything that you've experienced in your life, is the evidence. That includes, therefore, a vast amount that you're bound to accumulate over long periods of time, over the weeks, months, years, for many decades, perhaps even lifetimes. Who knows? It's going back to beliefs about life and death. Recently I've been much more preoccupied studying deaths, because there's been so many reports about the infection recently. We're getting, reports often about how many people have died of various infections or alleged to have, and studying various mortality rates. And I've been trawling through various sites, looking at different causes of deaths, overall numbers of deaths. Something like reportedly 60 to 70 million people die each year. Well, even when we look at that sort of information, it's often based on assumptions, and often our language is, because I noticed that when someone close to me died recently, that when we talked about going to visit their body, their corpse, we often talked about going to visit her as if she was that corpse. And when we were deciding what to do with the body, we were talking about what to do with her, as if she was that. And it struck me at the time that how wrong that was, that I just felt that the lifeless corpse was no longer that person, that what made the essence of that person was no longer there. That essence, whatever we call it, that life energy, was when that person was alive, when they were able to move the body. And it just a bit like the wind, I would say, although I couldn't see their person, their essence, what made them who they are, I could see the effects of it through how they chose and were able to move the body and how they used it. For example, the things that they created or even destroyed, the things that they spoke and they said and they did, those could be seen as reflections of the person. But when that person's died, or when their body has, then we tend to realize they're no longer that body. So we accept that, at least, that they have left the body, or they are at least no longer within that body. But I think we have a tendency to assume, therefore, that they have died. And I don't know that. I can't prove that as a fact. All I can say is, at that point, scientifically, that corpse is no longer them. That no longer has any life about it. But I don't know, therefore, what happened to them. I can say maybe what happened to their body, maybe what caused the body, biologically speaking, to die. But I don't know what's happened to their soul, if they had one. And so too often I feel like our language reflects that bias, that assumption that we all carry. And it does seem to me to be an assumption, because I haven't yet seen any evidence proving that there is no soul, that we don't have an essence beyond the material and neurological body and mind. And in actual fact, I wouldn't say that there's evidence proving that we do have that, but I would say there is a strong feeling, and I can only speak for myself, but I was just reading an interesting article, and the guy was saying that when he looked in the mirror at himself, at his physical being at least, and he saw himself in his 40s, and he thought, he just couldn't believe that was him. He felt like exactly the same person as when he looked in the mirror as a teenager. He felt he hadn't aged, really, although his body was aging, maybe decaying and wrinkling, but he felt inside himself, his true self, he felt that it was the same person. And I feel the same, actually. I could relate to what he was saying in that article, that I feel whatever illness my body has, whatever age it is, I feel that I am the same person. I don't feel like I have changed. I suppose a soul does grow, or has the potential to grow if there is one. But I don't feel that it's necessarily confined to the bodily restraints. And I feel like I am still myself, at whatever age I am. And I would say I don't feel that it's my body alone that conforms who I am as a person. If I was to have an accident, or and have serious injury, would that change who I am in essence? And that's a really interesting study, that. Well, there's a lot of scientists that do tend to reduce who we are to a neurological point of view. We are neurologically our brain function. Well, of course, if you study people that have got impairments neurologically, you may have some experience to provide evidence of that. And people have varying experiences with that. And it will be worthwhile perhaps to have more studies on that, actually. Because if you do lose the ability to function in your physical self in some ways, are you still in essence the same? Does the impairment change who you are? And you could also argue not just the neurological damage, but also in terms of the environmental situation that surrounds you. Does that affect who you are as a person? I'm not going to provide all answers because I don't have them there, but I think there's a really interesting area for debate within that. And I'm sure that there's a wealth of different people's experiences within that. I've certainly met people that have had serious impairments. I've met people that have had a stroke and have lost the ability to speak or to move with parts of their body. Have had partial paralysis, serious impairments. But their friends and families have still found that they are, in essence, the same. They can see through the disability and still connect to that same person, with enough effort. On the other hand, I've also met somebody married to someone with dementia who kept visiting them in a care home, and their husband didn't recognize them at all, talked gibberish, was reduced to the mental age of a 7 or 8 year old. It was quite sad, really. And they continued visiting them. And obviously, in that situation, it seemed like they had lost the actual person that they were married to, and that they were unable to sort of be the same person. The deformity neurologically was so great for them that it was hard for them to connect with them as the same, and so that there seems to be sort of evidence arguing that neurological damage does change who you are. But I also have seen much anecdotal evidence to say the opposite as well. So I'm quite wary about using anecdotal evidence where I don't know fully the situation. And also, I think that would perhaps need to have a more rigidly scientific study of a variety of different cases, because I don't know, having met those people, how reliable they are, what their conditions really were before and after. I just have met so many different people who've got different theories about that, and some of them actually have got a lot of experience and are probably well placed to have a qualified opinion on that subject. I met a care assistant, for example, that had worked closely with victims of dementia, and she felt that she had worked with clients during the process where the dementia had gradually developed over the years, and she still maintained that she was able to see something, a core something about these people that she recognized as an essence of them, although it was difficult to see and a struggle because of the severe disability that involved. I watched, but that, even then, that could be her personal view, and that maybe that was limited to her experiences with those few clients that she specialized in. Maybe that doesn't speak for, the tens and hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of others. So I'd be more interested to see a wider study that's less based on personal, subjective accounts of anecdotal evidence. So my own position, I suppose, is to remain, therefore, agnostic on that position. But my gut feeling tells me that there is something like a soul or a spirit, however we define it. But I do think that we don't know what that is entirely. I think that that is part of our struggle, actually, to become and to see what our souls can be. And I think there could be a thing in that we are on a journey, actually, of growing our soul, and actually, like, trying to find out who and what we are is a part of that. I personally would say that I feel more alive when I'm doing something and excelling in something, something I feel is right, and something in my heart that drives me on, that I've got a real belief about, rather than doing something that's mechanical, something that I'm just going through the motions of, something that I half-heartedly or don't really believe in. When I'm actually doing something that brings joy to my soul, then I feel it's alive. Other people would counter that and say, well, that's just sentimental, that's just your own beliefs, that's just subjective, and that's just your feelings, you're just projecting then. And yes, I admit it's just a feeling, however strong that might be. However, I do feel that there are times in my life when I have felt alive with my soul, when I tried to be honest, whatever other people think of me. Sometimes that means taking risks and things, so be it. But that's when I felt alive, when I'm doing something that I personally believe in, not doing something necessarily to please others or because I feel coerced or pressured to do something, or doing it just to fit in or to conform, perhaps, but doing it because it's something that on a deeper personal level that I feel is right, whatever the consequences of that might be. And I feel like there have been times in my own life when I probably haven't done that, and when I haven't embraced my own feelings. I feel like there are really times when I've been an actor living pretense, where I have shied away from my own real feelings. For example, perhaps I might witness something a friend is doing and really disapprove morally of what they're doing, but I might not want to say because I might be upset or fearful of losing their friendship, or I might not want to provoke an argument. And so it might just be easier for me to keep quiet about that. But times when I have spoken up and said something, and that does often involve, I think, taking a risk. Then, I'm not saying I've always done that right. I haven't, and often I've got it wrong. But those times I've felt like I'm actually doing and saying something with purpose, and that there's real emotion, and I'm not acting, and that's when I feel alive. And I do feel that there's a big thing in that often we are acting, and sometimes it's necessary to act, of course. I think there's a question of when it's legitimate to and when it's not. If you're really emotional and going through grief, and you're having to be responsible to look after children, or you're in a workplace where you're a professional dealing with clients, it's important to be restrained in your emotions during those times, perhaps. But then there may be times when it's proper and it's reasonable to sort of confront your own truthful emotional feelings about a subject and not repress them, So I feel like, personally, whether we're alive or not depends on how connected we are to the emotional reality of how we really feel about a subject, about a person, about various situations in life. Because our emotions can be quite really difficult sometimes to deal with. We can feel really frightened of situations. We can feel really depressed, really angry, really confused about a variety of different situations. And so there can be a lot of pressure, just to sort of to act a different way. And so confronting and working through those emotions, and trying to deal with them honestly, can be hard, but I think is probably the rewarding thing in the long term, and I would think is what helps our soul to grow. Going back to life and death in general, what is it to live is a key question, really. And assuming that we're always living all the time makes the assumption of what life is. Just merely existing itself isn't necessarily living. I know that because I've had times in my life where I'm not living to the fullest of my potential. I'm not making enough effort. I'm not taking risks that are necessary. I'm not confronting and being honest about my emotions in various situations. Perhaps I don't want to upset others. I don't want to risk myself sometimes. And there could be other reasons for that. So we might make assumptions, I think, about what it really means to live, and therefore what it really means to die as well. Life and death seem intimately connected. Perhaps there's a right way to live and a wrong way to live as well. And probably we all sometimes do some right things and some wrong things, to a varying extent. I doubt anyone lives the right way, doing everything honestly and courageously and truthfully all the time. I certainly don't. But I also doubt that anyone does, completely wrong things all the time. There may be a limited number of people that are angelic or monstrous and demonic all the time. But I suspect even those people that might be very bad or very good probably on occasions do some things contrary to what's normal for them. But I suspect as well a much larger number, much more normal, would be people who do lots of good and lots of bad as well. Not necessarily bad, but aren't necessarily living to the fullest of our potential all the time. And I suspect that's probably true of all of us. And that's just to say that we're not perfect, that we're all learning, we're students of life, we've all got lots to improve upon ourselves, And so therefore, I think it's confronting, that question, what does it mean to live properly in our lives? Where can we improve our lives so that we are living more honourably? What does it mean to live more honourably? That's a great ancient philosophical question that people have struggled with across different continents and through different cultures and different philosophies and politics and religions and theologies. And people from all different backgrounds and races and ages are all confronted and have to struggle through what that question is. On a collective level, we do as humanity, but also from a personal point of view, we all have that individual struggle ourselves too. And so I think rather than making assumptions that we know what life and death necessarily is and what the soul itself necessarily is, I think that much more truthful is an agnostic position, that there are some things about life and death that we just don't know. Who among us has lived life every hour of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, for every decade, and however long our life is, to the fullest of our potential, doing everything we feel is honourable and right always? No one. No one's done right all the time. We've all done some things that we may deeply regret, or other things that we haven't done that we'd wished we had done, perhaps. And therefore we've all got things to improve upon ourselves. And not to say that we necessarily always know what the right thing to do is in a situation. You can think of many possible grey areas where we're confronted with different moral dilemmas. You might witness an alleged assault, and you might think, is it two people having a fight, or is it one person who's actually assaulting another person? And I therefore need to step in and perhaps help that victim who might need my support. And so a different situation, might call on us to assess it and to make a decision and discern what is right. And we might be confronted with a whole variety of different kinds of moral dilemmas during the course of our lives, which will call us to make that discernment, to make that decision, and we all have throughout the course of our lives, many opportunities, what we'll be faced with, where we have to make moral judgments within our own lives, and deciding what we'll do in different given situations. So it's worthwhile reflecting on those, although we can't always predict an infinitely variable set of different circumstances. We never know quite what's around the corner in life or how we should react. Sometimes you have to just decide on a spur of the moment thing. So I think we've all got things we can learn about ourselves, and we need to be cautious not to assume that any of us totally understand what life is already about. We're here, I think, to investigate, to probe, to try and find out what life is about, what true living really means. And many of us have been on that kind of journey where we've discovered, what we thought living was about 20 years ago or even a few years ago isn't what we believe now. We've changed our beliefs over times about that, and we have done about life and perhaps about death too, and perhaps about our beliefs about the soul as well. Our beliefs and how we react and change in our lives itself can change over time, according to circumstances, according to how our beliefs change as well. So how we feel about life and death and the soul, itself can change radically over a long period of time, although it can also be very slow, gradual changes as well, like a flower that gradually opens up and grows. When you watch it, it doesn't seem to change at all, but if you speed up on a sort of camera, then you'll see, it does change, doesn't it? So I think if you look at it in a long-term perspective, that we ourselves change how we feel about life and death and soul. So therefore we should be mindful that how we feel now isn't necessarily the absolute truth, that we still have empty pages in our book to fill out, that need to be written on, things that we don't know, things that we're still looking for and searching to find out and to learn still. We're all students of lives. We're not the teacher of life. We might be teachers of some things that we've learnt. We may well have invested enough time and energy and found out some things. And it's important to know the things that we do know and to hold on to those things dearly, especially when there are so many other things that we don't know in life. A vast amount of things, of course. I actually kind of feel like we've got two ears and one mouth, because there are more things to listen to in the world and to